Hello, everyone. I'm Leaf with UFOB. Thank you for joining us. Today, our guest is Ted Rowe. Ted Rowe is the Executive Director of NARCAP.org, the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. NARCAP defined and established the term Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, or UAP. NARCAP is a fully accredited 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the documentation and analysis of aviation safety-related encounters with unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UAP. NARCAP was founded in 1999. So, on top of Ted being the executive director of NARCAP, he also is a freediving instructor and does a few other things on the side that I could only hope we could talk about, but we'll see how that goes. Today, Ted would like to speak to people who are coping with exposure to the UAP phenomenon. But before we bring on Ted, we need to welcome the UFOB team. So first, we will bring on Ramsey. Hey, Ram, how's it going? Yep. I don't hear you. Are you there?
Yes.
There you are.
I switched. I went to mute.
Excellent. All right. So welcome, Ramsey. And next we have Adam. Hey, Adam.
Hello, hello. How are we doing?
Yep, Adam is the co-host of the UFOB Experiencer series. And next we have Nigel. Hello, Nigel. Nigel's another one of our original UFOB members. How's it going, Nigel?
Happy to be here.
And then we're going to have Caspian on later if he can make it. Hopefully the network works for him. But Caspian has been a lifetime experiencer, and we interviewed him first for our experiencer series. But his story is so long; it's ongoing, and it's very compelling. And we've needed multiple interviews to tell it. And you'll be seeing those interviews soon, and hopefully he'll be on with us shortly. So without further ado, let's welcome Ted Rowe from beautiful Hawaii. Aloha, Ted.
Aloha, everybody. Nice
Shaka bra.
Welcome, Ted.
Thank you for being here, Ted. Before talking about helping people who've been exposed, tell us about NARCAP and what you're doing with AIAA, which is the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics.
Well, sure. I was a founding member of NARCAP. Dr. Haines and I put it together in 1999, and we focused almost entirely on aviation safety-related incidents involving unidentified. And in that time, in the 20 years that we've been operating, we published on our website about 50 studies on generally related to UAP and aviation safety. And then in the last summer, when the ODNI report came out, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence report came out, it cited aviation safety as one of the three primary issues they were concerned with. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics inviting myself and several others to present at their AV21 conference. And then a month later, they called us back and asked us to form a development team and help them create a UAP focused team, and which we did. I've spent the last 6 months working on. So we'll be presenting again this summer at the AV22 conference. And for those that don't know it, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics is the premier professional society for aviation and aeronautical sciences and engineering in the world. They 71 technical groups, 9 integration and outreach committees, a number of communities of interest, forums, etc. So a very professional, very science-oriented organization.
Mm-hmm. And what will you be presenting when you are there? What kind of topics are you going to cover?
Well, it depends. The theme is going to be the same as last year's, which is advocating for the scientific study of unidentified aerial phenomena. And hopefully we'll have speakers from government and various high-profile individuals to talk a little bit about the importance of studying UAP, to continue encouraging these engineers and scientists to step up and get involved with our program.
Okay. So from there, when it comes to the reports that you get directly to NARCAP, and tell us about some of those reports and moving to the exposure when after people are exposed to a UAP, whether it be distance or at close range.
Well, our cases that we work are generally focused. They have aviation safety factors involved. The pilots have to have, opted to disengage the autopilot, to strap in, to talk about what they're dealing with, so that we have some kind of a record. The last couple of cases that I've dealt with have involved cockpit video, guys getting their cell phones out and videoing the interior of the cockpit, videoing what their CCAS radar is showing them, videoing the UAP outside of the airplane, this kind of thing. So it's getting more interesting from the commercial end of it all.
Yes,
I wrote an advisory to pilots that sort of hits on all the reasons why pilots need to be prepared for this, and gives them the kind of the basics, so they know kind of what to expect when dealing with UAP. Their pilots are unprepared. The incidents are unexpected, and the UAP themselves are unpredictable. And I wrote a couple studies myself documenting aviation safety cases with UAP, and that's probably the most dangerous part of it, other than the collision headings and this kind and the close passes and pacing, is just the general safety issues of pilots feeling like they have to do something. Sometimes that input isn't necessarily the right thing to do. If they find themselves confronted, then if they don't have any guidelines, if they don't have some understanding of what it's about, then it's all in their hands and they have no knowledge. So part of the advisory that I wrote is very conservative and tells them to put the UAP behind them, change directions, make a report on why you had to change heading, and but get away from the thing.
And all of this that you've written is at narcap.org.
Yes, you can find all these on NARCAP.org. They're widely read. I have 150 plus countries looking at that pretty much every month.
Mm-hmm. And how often do you get calls?
I get several a month, but often they break under scrutiny for whatever reason. They're either clearly mundane or misidentifications of human or natural activity, this kind of thing. I just got contacted on a sighting this morning that involved a flight from Boston to Memphis, I think it was, and they saw something, a bright light and a string of lights and so on, and I was pretty well able to correlate it to a Falcon 9 Starlink launch and deployment. So a lot of cases resolve that way. Then some don't. You have to follow all the evidence, what the pilots have to say, what any instrument documentation helps with, all of it, and then make a good decision about whether it's a hill to die on, as the case goes.
Yeah, well, it's good that you're able to figure out what most of them are when it's really not a UAP. Yeah,
and then some cases just aren't workable. There just isn't enough information. I can't get to the pilots, or it's so popular that everybody's all over the case, and they're not actually bringing back information that's really going to resolve it. It's tricky, and pilots are subject to illusions and misidentifications just like everybody else is. And in fact, in their environment, there's some specific ones that they're vulnerable to, and we go through a whole list of all of that. Take a look at astronomical issues, is Venus bright, this kind of thing, and then make a decision on whether or not the case is indicative of the kinds of cases that seem to involve UAP. it's not the last word. Generally, my reports start with a preliminary analysis, because there's always more data waiting somewhere. And occasionally, ufology steps up. I published a study, and I had it right. It was a UAP as far as the air crew was concerned, and as far as I was concerned, it was coated in plasma. It had a short plasma contrail on it. It was everything that the air crew said it was. And I got it up on the website, and within a couple of hours, I was getting back that it was a Falcon 9 booster. So I did another 5 minutes of research, and son of a gun, that quick peer review, and so I deferred the case down and to Jim Oberg, who's kind of got a specialty in that area. So.
Well, that's interesting, because originally I thought you might have been referring to the 2020 case where the co-pilot shot with his phone. I think it was going either from Mexico to Colorado or vice versa, but that was an interesting case. So I guess that one hasn't been debunked.
No, not really. The clearest candidate for debunking it, if I was going to try and shoot it down, is that it was Venus. Venus at that time, in that year, at that time, was quite bright. But arguing against that is both instrument-based and the air crew could see Venus from the moment they took off heading northbound from First Airport, right in their windscreen, and then watching it move to their left as they moved north towards Memphis. And then when they turned their radar, the camera onto the radar, you can see that there are banks of clouds to the west. And if Venus was actually giving a pace in the aircraft, which you could do, then it would have been obstructed by the cloud between the observer and Venus itself. There was just a couple of other reasons why that explanation for that case didn't hold up. And one of them was the description of how it came to them. It came from above, stopped at their level, a light scanned down the side of the aircraft, and then it paced the aircraft.
I don't see anything on GPS at all. Yeah, man. And there's no strobe. I don't see and the fact that it dropped out of the sky like that and then stopped and hovered. He's probably just checking us out. I was going to turn on the light over there, but looks like he's turning away from us. That is phenomenal, man. Look at that. Yeah, they're all over Mexico, dude.
I wonder what you can do with that video. Like, if you can
What?
I was like, shit, it just disappeared.
Where'd he go? Is he there? All right. Oh, it's the clouds.
It's in the clouds, yeah.
Well, there it is. Right there, man, on my ND. There's our airplane. And there's no TCAS. There's weather about 40 miles off our left wingtip where this thing seems to have disappeared.
So you have to include that in it's part of the evidence. And so I didn't, like I said, it's a preliminary analysis, but it's kind of where you're stuck, between actually being able to verify and validate it or debunk it, Not a hill to die on. None of these cases are,
It's not worth it. But yeah, that's a compelling case.
I thought so.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone else?
Yeah, there was one case from, I believe it was Ireland, off the coast of Ireland a few years ago. And it feared, they thought it was a meteorite, that was the explanation, but it veered off. Well, meteorites don't do that. And I believe it even climbed at some point. And it was seen from several airplanes by several pilots. And it was never solved. And it's strange because when a case isn't solved, people should, scratch their head like, okay, this points to something, but they just, they don't do anything with it. It's strange.
Well, I think a lot of it is that they follow the American FAA's lead on the subject. A lot of other countries, because they're all associated through the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is the UN overarching FAA, if you want to call it that. It divides the world into 7 regions. And all of those countries that are in our region are kind of guided by the way we do things. And most of the world's global aviation is kind of based on the way Americans set it up. And so, you know, the FAA doesn't take pilot reports and hasn't for 3 decades. So it doesn't if a pilot says a UFO threatened my aircraft, they defer them away from the FAA to an organization like mine. It has a chilling effect on reporting, and you don't really get good research. Obviously, a meteorite doesn't, you know, change altitude and heading, right? It's a ballistic flight path, you know. So, but you know, they're quick to just kind of sweep it on by as unexplainable and just move on, because I mean, what are you going to do about it? The development team that I'm working on with AIAA picks up where NARCAP left off in focusing on aviation safety and aviation issues. So we're going to be raising this, the timber of this conversation, quite a bit in the coming years. And we're going to be having conversations with all of the civil aviation authorities that will talk to us in the world. And we'll be dealing with the ICAO, and we'll be dealing with FAA and the Pentagon and everybody else trying to effect change in the safety environment, air traffic management, space traffic management. So all of this is subject to change, but the status quo has been inadequate to get us to any answers.
Mm-hmm.
I think the safety angle is a great angle to increase the awareness level and reduce the ridicule factor. I'm not sure much has changed since Captain Terauchi encountered whatever he encountered with his flight over Alaska. He pretty much landed himself a desk job after he reported everything. And I think that's probably the main factor holding back more openness among pilots. And I have a very close personal friend who's a pilot. In fact, he trains other pilots on simulators. And I've tried repeatedly to raise this topic, and he's not inclined to have a conversation, because I'm thinking he meets with so many pilots from around the world. Surely someone has seen something, but it's not a common topic to talk about.
Well, it is. It kind of depends on the individual culture of their business. Some of them, heck, they let us do aircrew surveys. And we got to, you know, survey the whole pilot corps for an airline. Others wouldn't even answer our emails. Being a pilot is a competitive position. You talk about the wrong things, and the guy in the seat next to you may use it against you. So there's and you're not around them that much. You know, you don't fly with the same crew all the time. You know, so there's you don't develop these kind of close-knit relationships that let you confide with each other. Off the record, they'll do it. And I often have pilots come to me when they know I'm around to tell me about it. I was at a Shriners meeting up in Alaska last summer, and I had, as soon as people knew what I was about, and I moved away from a campfire for a minute, and one by one, people started breaking away to tell me their stories, you know, the things they'd seen. And that's a pretty common situation. So it's really about getting a social sanction to allow people to communicate on this. And this was the third of the 3 points that the ODNI report made, which was there's a social stigma that is preventing proper engagement of the subject. And that's part of what we're doing with our program at AIAA. AIAA is huge. We've got 30,000 members, you know. And so we're trying to move the subject within the aeronautical sciences and engineering community. I told Hains back when we started NARCAP that if we could change the aviation system, we could change the world on the subject of UAP. It really, it's a pressure point. Over and over again, you read of safety factors involved in these cases, and yet the information just goes out of the aviation system, away from the safety planners, and is lost. And over again, you keep hearing these stories of these harrowing near misses and this kind of thing, pacing between the wingtip and the tail of an aircraft. Just all kinds of situations that should make any safety planner nervous if they actually got across his desk. And for 30 years, the FAA didn't let it get across anybody's desk.
Well, it sounds like it's part of that suppression that's been going on for 40, 50 years. I mean, I know in the military in the 70s and 80s, if anyone that was in the military mentioned anything about, just say, the tic-tac type of stuff, they could get in serious trouble, and they weren't allowed to talk about it. And then on top of that, just ridicule for common people, civilians, is still going on. I mean, it's still like you say, these pilots, they wait till you're alone before they approach you and tell you their story.
Right. Well, and the stigma is so strong. I remember when we started NARCAP, I couldn't talk about any of my own exposures because I was protecting the reputation of my team. And I had people like Dr. Valez on staff, Dr. Haines, Dr. Heisch, Dr. Jim McClenahan, who's passed on since, and then a host of NASA scientists and engineers, all underground. And it was really tricky, being able to talk about it at all. That's why we chose the term UAP, was because UFO comes with such an immediate stigma that it just closed minds before we could speak to them. But UAP kind of didn't, and it gave us the appearance of neutrality, which is what they're looking for in the science end of things. And because of that, we stayed away from ufology. We stayed away from conferences. We didn't associate with the other organizations that were out there, and just focused on doing our own work and our own program and following business standards, which was my contribution to all of it, the business standards and strategy. And we ended up briefing congressmen. We participated in a number of things. We briefed the FAA's aviation safety reporting system analysts. We got into all kinds of situations that standard ufological organizations couldn't get into, and it was because we were conservative and persistent.
And not spouting off crazy conspiracies or talking about experiences that are hard for people to grasp. That sounds like that was the way to go. And I'm sure it's funny when you talk about how you made the word UAP, more or just better, easier to grasp for people because the UFO stigma. That it reminds me of when Hillary Clinton was on, I think it was Kimmel or something, and she called it a UAP, and he called her on that, said, "Oh, UAP, huh?" And I don't know. I thought that was pretty cool.
That was a result of us briefing Podesta's group, Tony Podesta's PR team, and they helped us get access to the congressman and some of the other things that we did. But yeah, there's been an underground even at the highest levels to try and move something forward on all of this, given that it's not just the military that are having these engagements, these exposures. So, but I used mine to my best advantage by not talking about it, and we're listening very carefully to other witnesses and making sure that they're heard. That I made a very hard point on the sphere of my organization. You couldn't push me off of the reality of UAP. And within a year and a half, I think, of us doing that, the British government came out with their study, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in UK air defense zones. And in it, they stated that UAP were a hazard to aviation safety. And then a little bit later, we started hearing from other parts of the world that were also picking up this aviation safety argument. And then I knew we were in the door when Senator Warner came down the steps of the Capitol in 2018 and used our term UAP and talked about aviation safety. And that's when I knew we'd finally crossed a bridge in the work we've been trying, the awareness that we've been trying to raise. But it all came from being very conservative with our presentation and being persistent about it.
Yeah, you got your foot farther than just in the door on that one.
Yeah, and then now what we're doing at AIAA, though it isn't derivative of NARCAP, it's definitely much stronger program, much deeper. I have access to a huge brain trust, so NARCAP has probably served its function for what we needed it to be for this last 20-some years.
Is it not? I was going to ask: is it not only access to a brain trust, but is there also technology too to see UAP?
Yeah, and spaceborne, airborne, and ground-based detection modalities that we're going to be looking into in a big way to understand how to make the aviation environment safer for pilots and air crews. The low survivability of air crews in a catastrophe, you can't really tell whether a UAP was involved or not because they're intermittently detected on radar. So you don't know whether it contributed to a catastrophe or not. But we have a number of stories of bent metal and pilots claiming that they'd been hit by objects. And then of course that's just in the American side of things. When you go international, then all of these other stories start coming up. Central Mexico, Central and South America have tons of stories to tell us, and we hear about some of them. I wrote the first research agreement with the government of Chile between a private UFO or UAP research group and a government research team, which is it's called CEPA, Committee for the Study of Anomalous Aerial Phenomena.
It seems that the South American countries, they're way ahead of us in the sense of their population is more okay with talking about it than we are. Do you find that true, or?
Okay, yeah, I think the Mexico, Central and South America take the subject a little more seriously than we have here in the U.S. And they have for some time. The Peruvian government has a research team. The Chilean government has a research team. I think the Brazilian government has a focus group. Pretty sure Mexico does too. And they're all looking at it generally through the lens of the military because their resources are kind of combined. When their aviation system and their military system often overlap. They're smaller countries. Yeah, I'd say that in a lot of ways they're a little further along than we are in at least collecting data and taking it seriously.
So Ted, tell me about your interest in offering helpful information to people struggling with PTSD from exposure to the phenomenon.
That's probably been the biggest personal concern I've had, having had to wrestle with it myself. I mean, I've had UAP exposures all my life. Not a lot of them. You know, it's not like I go outside every day and there's one out there. It's years between usually. And sometimes I see them in the research context when I'm on specific hotspots where they happen and I'm there to see it. It has nothing to do with me. Other times I have these personal exposures, and it's really destabilizing and difficult. So when I have pilot witnesses or any witnesses that come to me, I'm kind of always checking in with them. Are you okay? How do you feel? What's going on? And my advice is always to go to a professional that's ethically and professionally responsible for what they say and do in your head, you know, and then shop around until you get one that can help you with trauma and then work it through. Of course, different personality types have different types of responses to it. Some will just close it off and never look at it or see it again. Others will just become completely immersed in it. Mainly, the trauma will force them to try and recreate the sensation of the incident, only with them coming out on top instead of being terrorized by what.
How's that? Can you explain a little more in detail?
Well, sure. You know, when a lot of times a trauma reaction is related to the first time you felt that way, and sometimes the first time you felt that level of fear and isolation was with a parent. Maybe you had a bad relationship at home, you know, and it was difficult. And then you're all of a sudden you're confronted by this thing, this unknown, and there's no framework to hold your sanity together. And you revert to the first time you felt that level of terror and fear, which had nothing to do with that. So the UAP problem is complex on an original trauma that wasn't UAP related. And I think a lot of people have this problem. And so what you'll end up doing is try to recreate the incident in a way where you come out on top, where it's like what you do after a lot of people do after they get out of a fist fight, you know, and then they're talking to themselves. Oh, geez, you know, I should have done this. And then, you know, but the reality of it is that you missed your moment and you're traumatized by the outcome. And, so you're trying to recreate it in a way that you can live with yourself afterwards. And when UAP comes stalking you across a city, for example, and then ends up right in your face and turns your life upside down, that need to recreate the stress in a way where you win can override just about any kind of judgment you have. And so you go into risk behaviors. I used to swim alone in the ocean, freediving. I did it every day for about 4 years, swimming with dolphins. And I had encounters with every kind of sea critter you can imagine, tons of shark run-ins, all of it, all alone out in the ocean. I used to compare being exposed to UAP to being exposed to sharks. But then once I was exposed to big sharks, then no, it wasn't. It didn't satisfy that sensation at all. The only thing that makes it right is standing under it and seeing it again, and then not being completely paralyzed by it. And that I've arrived at that point, but it took me 2 decades and a heck of a lot of personal work to get there. And a lot of people don't get there. And you'll see them. They're in the Twitter feeds. They're in the experiencer groups and so on, trying to hold it together, and they're just not. And the groups don't have any help for them.
Mm-hmm. And well, tell
I
us.
tried to step up and.
Yes. Yes, I was just going to say, yeah. Tell us.
So I've tried to step up. Yeah. So my focus, along with moving the science, is looking at my engineers and my scientists and anticipating them learning what I already know and how they're going to handle it, and looking out for their mental health. And so as we staff our program, I have to kind of watch carefully who these people are and how they function and how they deal with what they're going to learn. Because I'm a little further down the rabbit hole looking back up at them, and they're not really prepared. They have very narrow focuses. So the ideas of the inferences and implications that come from the data don't immediately jump into their perspective the way they would a tactical thinker, a military person, or a lawyer, or somebody like that. And as part of that process, I've come to recognize that it isn't just scientists and engineers, it's the psychological profession. So I've been developing a program with psychologists and psychiatrists to start informing their peers so that they can start helping people who have had exposures and aren't handling them well, and people who are using exposures to underscore another problem entirely as well. So
Now, how do you do that? Because if you're working with psychologists and psychiatrists on something like this is, again, the stigma is attached to UFOs and aliens and stuff. So how do you get them prepared? I mean, tell me what you do.
Well, got a little squall coming through here. do it the same way we do it with the scientists. We start them in the shallow end of the pool, and let them know that there is government validation that these things exist, and that there are dedicated PhDs and scientists working hard on it to resolve it, and that it's very likely that people who come to them for help aren't necessarily fantasizing at all. And you just do it. You put your feet down, you look them right in the eyes, and you tell them what they need to hear. And you just keep doing it. I did it for 20 years, walking the razor's edge with NARCAP. I'm going to move just a second here. The squall's coming through.
Yep.
So basically, you just stand up and look them in the eye and give them the smallest possible indication. UAP are real, and then let them draw their inferences from their professionals, their PhDs. They can figure this stuff out,
Right.
And then provide support as you can to get them into position to where they can inform their peers first, and then start working with their clients along a different line. Start looking for professional engagement on the subject.
So then with those engineers that you're working with and such, are you working on having, I want to say, internal people there that can help them once they start dealing with the phenomenon?
Well, I'm just making sure that I have a network that I can fall back on, that I can give referrals to help people with that. There are some programs out there. There's one called OPUS. It's run by a friend of mine, Lester Valez, and they do referrals for people that have exposures to paranormal experiences. Lester and I had one together out in the middle of the desert at a hot spot, and we're still working on that one. But he's actually going to be part of this program I'm putting together, and we're going to probably start with an advisory or a paper of some kind to just that it's kind of an informative starter to the issue, and hopefully that'll lead to more people getting involved, and we'll see a snowball effect inside the psychology community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's because it sounds like it's a great thing to be doing to get psychologists and psychiatrists prepared for what's coming, and I guess some people out there might be thinking, well, what's coming? So what do you think is coming?
Well, we're going to learn more about these objects, and they are objects. They're detectable on multiple sensing platforms, and the data we're using in our program comes from those platforms. And it's looking like they're everywhere, and that doesn't bode well if this involves an intelligence. In my book, we have boundaries, and if there's a they don't respect them. And whether it's a geopolitical boundary or a global boundary or a physical personal boundary or a psychological boundary, they don't respect any of that. And you can argue about why they don't, but to me that doesn't bode well in intent analysis, when you know that they're coming inside the wire and laying hands on your people. They're not asking. You talk to all experiencers, they'll give you all kinds of reasons why they have their exposures, but the one thing they can't do is stop them. Yeah,
I think it's definitely you said to me earlier that the phenomenon, I believe, was referring to the phenomenon as a hazard to our thinking, and I would expect that to be very true for engineers and scientists that are starting to deal with this, because of course here we are, we've been doing interviews and so forth with people that are experiencers, as well as people who have even cited these things, and it's not a pretty picture. It doesn't paint a nice picture of what could possibly be going on, especially after we interviewed Matt Hurley, who has badaliens.info. And it's like, well, look, you got cattle mutilations. There are some human mutilations. You have the Colaris case. That was UFO attacks or UAP attacks on the people. This doesn't look good. So yeah, it's a very interesting it's a very interesting set of scenarios we have going on. And why are they here? What are they doing? And obviously they don't care about us, and they can certainly manipulate our consciousness. They can manipulate our perception. They can, if what these abductees are saying, they can do anything they want with us, like lab rats.
Well, it looks that way. The incidents themselves are so sterile that you can project anything you want on them. You know, you can claim you were touched by the hand of God, you know, and that you're the special chosen one, that the aliens trust you above all others to give their message to the world, or you can be the exact opposite of that. And you know, I was somebody who was never that special. Okay, and then all of a sudden I was having these exposures again in my 40s, and I woke up to that. I realized that I was way above the statistical average, that I was one of those people that had these stories to tell. And it went way back to when I was a kid. I called my grandparents because they were with me with one of the first ones, and they validated, you know, my memory of it all. And I was 5 years old then. So
that's another interesting one with experiencers, is you were 5 years old and then nothing for what, 35 years. And then you had some more experiences. It
can go like that. I had experiences in my teens, several of them, and in my early 20s, several of them, and then nothing for 18 years that I remember. Mm-hmm. And then I had a series of 4 or 5 exposures, including one real eye popper in Oakland, and that one kind of broke me. I was really not well for a couple of months. Because the thing stalked me. It came right across the sea to me, and that was really uncomfortable to process. I ended up sending a message to the PR office at Ames Research Center saying, I know you guys don't study these things, but you might want to, and if anybody wants to talk to me about it, I'm available. And Dr. Richard Haines showed up 12 hours later. You know, I had a slip out in the Alameda Marina there in Oakland, and was living on a sailboat, and so every morning I'd get up and I'd see this stretch of road where this all happened, and it was damned uncomfortable.
And so, well, how did you end up dealing with it if you were off for a few months? How did you deal with it, and how can that help others that are listening?
Well, I got sicker and sicker is what I did. And then in my association with Dr. Haines, I got invited to run NARCAP, and that put a cap on it. I couldn't talk to anybody about it now. I was trapped in this kind of perspective of defending my organization and making sure that my kookiness didn't get involved and upset the apple cart. So I was very careful with all of that for a number of years. But I was breaking down. It got worse and worse and worse, and things kind of came to a head when the economy collapsed in 2008. I didn't end up in the red, but I wasn't in the black either. Had nothing basically, and at that point, I ended up working with a professional psychologist who showed me what trauma and trauma work was, and gave me the initial insights so that I could start to understand my own predicament. And then she blew it and said she was in love with me, and that just kind of broke me. I moved away from psychologists at that point.
Wow.
And it turned out that she was probably reporting everything that she was learning back to my team at NARCAP.
Really?
Yeah, there's just a whole huge ethical breach. And so then
did that affect your did that affect your relationship with your fellow workers?
Well, you know, it did. but I just managed it. It's my program. I own NARCAP. You know, I'm the executive director. All the paperwork's in my name. You know, we're going to do it the way I'm going to have it done, in concert with my science chief. And so I just managed everything the way any company would manage any of these kinds of issues, you know, and just marched on. Fortunately, I didn't have any missteps of any real consequence. I was able to walk the razor's edge for as long as I did without getting too much on me. But I got into freediving. I moved to Hawaii in 2006. I spent years swimming alone in the ocean. Finally started taking a camera out, taking pictures, and then I trained with the best freedivers in the world for years, and then started one of the first freediving schools in the world, probably one of the first 5 or 6 of them. And then all the breath work and breath training and swimming alone in the sea and the mindset that you need to be able to do that started permeating me in a deep way. I got stronger. And then I started studying Buddhist mental training. The 4 pillars of mindfulness, Satipatthana it's called. And so you contemplate body, feelings, mind, and then the Dharma as a whole. And it takes a lot of work to do it. I spent a lot of time just living outdoors and meditating, running NARCAP with a laptop from under a tree, teaching martial arts until the monks invited me to train at their temple.
This is in Hawaii?
Yeah. So I taught Zen sword at Zen temple for 4 or 5 years.
So you can handle a sword.
Well, you know, I had all the time in the world. I was living on the beach. You know, I had my katanas and I had my diving gear, and I was making a lot of money. I didn't want for anything. I just lived outdoors and stayed light and worked hard with NARCAP. And eventually I understood my predicament and was able to make changes and ground myself. And then I started turning around and ministering to the people around me. And that's where I'm at right now, is trying to help other people that have had these experiences and aren't coping well.
And what do you tell them? How do you help them?
Oh, well, you're not alone. And I'm the last person to judge anyone who said they saw something unusual, because I sure as hell have. I know how it is out there. I just know how weird I've seen. And then I advise most of them to get help, you know, if they're really having problems, you know, to deal with therapists. Oftentimes they already are, you know. But then the rest of it is
the wrong therapist, right? Oh, sorry.
Well,
sorry to interrupt.
You know, you have to shop. No, you have to shop around, you know, if you want to have a therapist that works for you. And generally the Jungian school is probably smarter than the Freudians. But it depends on your personal nature and what your problem is with coping. It's hard to live in a world where you're not safe, period. Where you have the illusion of safety, but even in the middle of a city, these things will stalk you down. So, you know, it's an illusion. People have a hard time not whistling past the graveyard. They would rather do that than turn and face something that's kind of gritty, you know, and challenging.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to discuss something about Dr. Hains, because I admire him a lot. But you know, he always pops up everywhere in old videos, and he discusses things, sightings, and especially related to pilots and aviation. But he was also a research scientist at NASA. So what I want to know is, like, how did NASA look at him as a scientist? I mean, did they take him seriously, or?
I think so. He got the referral when I sent my own exposure to the PR office at Ames Research Center. He was the one that came back to me. So, you know, a lot of times when you have these kind of fringe topics, government is interested but isn't officially interested. People wear a couple of hats.
Yes.
You know, and during the day, human factors expert, perceptual psychologist, but he's also spent 40 years collecting pilot cases and studying both visual and photographic analysis of them. So called on for other things and other moments. So.
And do you think that he knew more?
Well, I think he knew more from the side of research than he talks about. But Dr. Haines had never seen UAP himself, so he wasn't motivated by personal exposure the way I was. Okay, which didn't necessarily weaken his work, but his focus sometimes wasn't as strong as I had hoped it would be. Like Project Sphere, we had 20 papers written on unidentified aerial phenomena that present as spherical lights or objects. And we wrote all these studies. I wrote the US section on it. There was some radar analysis and a few other things, but it stopped short of actually taking on an idea of what these things might be. And I had some ideas on where to go with that. I wrote a little paper on flight dynamics of UAP and engaged it a little further and started pushing the rock up the hill a little more. These guys weren't really there in that context. They were as driven as I was, I guess, to see a certain type of information develop. And that's not to denigrate Dr. Haines or any of the people that worked with us. We had up to 55, 60 people at different times, and everybody contributed in some way positively. And Dr. Haines was our director of research, and he did a lot of good work on his own, no question about it. Helped me write some papers too. But it was a product of the times, and now things have changed. And so now with NARCAP, we take an advocacy role rather than a research role. And then the aviation safety research is going to take place with AIAA and our partners around the world. So.
And all his collection is archived. Is it? Will it be safeguarded? Will it?
Yes, it is. Actually, I think Rice University has some of it, and I think the rest of it's with the Rocky Mountain University of Wyoming repository there. So yeah, it's safeguarded. It's all there. What's interesting though is that what we've learned is that most UAP activity is taking place outside of the visual spectrum. So the multi-sensor platforms that the fighters are using, this kind of thing, are actually where we're getting informed on what these things are about. And all we've ever worked with at NARCAP was anecdotal cases, pilots talking, right, or air controllers talking. Almost never had visual evidence. A couple of cases had photograph evidence. So the difference in the level of what we're working with now compared to what we worked with for 20 years, just trying to advocate to get people to look more closely, is night and day. So we're at a different level. And I think, Dr. Haines and Dr. Valez and Dr. Heisch and Jim McClanahan and all those guys, they did a really good job supporting our program in its time. Just like the UAP term,
yes.
It's lost its objectivity, but for the time we needed it, it worked. Mm-hmm. So.
Ted, Caspian just joined, but he doesn't have audio or video, so he just asked a question on the chat. He said, what did they take the reported and observed phenomenon as being that were studied under SPEAR, if they had enough interest to have reached a resolution?
Well, Caspian, that was kind of my critique of it. We didn't come to a conclusion other than they needed more research. And I think we could have added a lot more information around the subject than we did. I know I did a statistical cut in SPEAR in my work, looking at out of 100 cases that involved aviation safety, 44 of them involved spheres, balls of light mostly. and all of the cases that involved EM effects on avionic systems or electrical equipment, all of them involved spheres, balls of light. So we know that these things we're guessing they have a plasma field, and that there's some way that they're emitting in order to cause ionization to begin with, and that may interfere with certain aircraft systems. But that was kind of, we just didn't go far enough with it in my estimation. And we went as far as we could in 2010 when we wrote the thing, but things have changed, and now we can go further. The trick is to do it credibly and carefully and be results and evidence driven.
So I kind of want to go back to a consciousness aspect, and are the engineers and so forth ready for something like that? Like, because I wanted to also ask you if you had any kind of, in your experiences with the phenomenon or exposure to the phenomenon, was there anything in your head that was caused by them?
Well, I had some unusual interscapes, when things were going down, and every now and then I learned through my meditation work that intuition as well as actual psi function are just other ways that information moves around.
Mm-hmm.
And you can notice it coming to you that way or not. But you don't have to treat it like a novelty, where you just focus on that. Oh, I'm going to, telepathy, this kind of thing. You just use it as it moves through you, you take the information from wherever it comes and learn to listen to it. And I use it in the sea all the time. When I start picking up on shark, I start looking for shark, and pretty darn soon I see shark. It's, and you can call it intuition. Maybe my eye cued on something that my brain didn't, or I picked up on it another way. I don't worry about that. I just worry about whether I see the shark or not, So in that sense, you can get a little carried away with it, but at the same time, with a little training, you can hone some of it, so it's stronger.
Uh-huh.
And what was your?
Well, I was actually going to move over to, I guess what I really meant was with the psychiatrists and the psychologists that you're working with. Are you prepping them as well by saying, and this phenomenon also has much to do with our consciousness and how they can control and manipulate us, and how to prepare engineers and scientists for that?
Yeah, no. I'm not leading this. I'm hosting an environment where intelligent, rational people wielding objective awareness and insight can make their own inferences from the data and process that, publish it in their journals, work it out amongst themselves, argue about it, do whatever they need to do. All I'm doing is creating the environment to hold ground while that conversation takes place. And in a way, that's a lot of what we're doing with the AIAA too, with the engineers and scientists, is just holding the environment. We're sanctioning the conversation. And the minute you give these people permission to talk about it, they yak. I mean, we had some responses to our program from inside the AIAA where they were telling us about their UAP observations, mm-hmm. that they had seen them, that they were part of their family's experience, and so on. So, and they'd been waiting for an opportunity to do some of this work. Of course, there's the other end of the spectrum too, right? That's absolutely, disdainful of the whole thing. But reality is going to prove out, regardless of what you think of it, it is what it is. And at some point, everybody will wonder why they ever thought anything else about it than what they actually are.
Yeah, the data has already come out, like as you said, with the government and the ODNI and other papers that are coming out. It's certainly changed the minds of some academics. The first person I think of is Eric Weinstein, if I'm remembering correctly. He admits, I used to think you guys were all kooks, and now I'm my eyebrows raised and I'm listening.
One of our colleagues on the development team at AIAA is Dr. Ravi Koparapu, and he's been advocating for scientific research of UAP. He got an article in Scientific American last year, and he and his partner, Dr. Hawk Mizra, did a presentation at SETI Talk in November. And his whole thing originally was that they used to sit in their dorm rooms and abuse UFO believers on Facebook. That was the fun the nerds were having. Right?
It was them.
Yeah, it was them, sons of bitches. And then Robbie got a hold of Dr. McDonald's papers. They're online. Dr. James McDonald, and who was an atmospheric physicist, right, and who wrote two scientists about it in scientific language, and it turned Robbie completely around. And then the ODNI report came out, and all of a sudden now he's our co-chair of our program. So, people are going through changes, and we're going to see a lot of this. Bill Nelson, director of NASA, up there talking about it. He didn't say they were aliens, but he all but said they were alien. Mm-hmm. And we're not ready to say that yet. I mean, neither NARCAP nor the AIAA program's anywhere near talking about that. But as long as you check the room, the conversation about UAP can happen, and eventually the inferences and implications will move. If this is so and this is so, then therefore this must also be so. Mm-hmm. And so when intent analysis comes down the pipe, then,
Yeah, because I also feel like there's still must be some who believe that say the Tic Tacs are just our military doing exercises on our military, and there's actually a very high technology that hasn't been told by us. What do you think of that?
I think it's less likely than the alternative. These Tic Tacs are described as a capsule-shaped cylinder about 45 feet long. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they were glowing and rounded when they were observed by the pilots. The UAP I saw in Oakland that came right up to my car was a cylinder about 45, 50 feet long, had two big white lights under it, and the reality of these things is it's bigger than any of the particular arguments, against them. I don't think for a minute that the aviation system is flying anything on general relativistic principles. I just don't. And if you look at Kevin Knuth's presentation to AIAA last summer, Dr. Knuth talked about the flight dynamics of several incidents involving UAP, and raised some very important questions that sort of move the conversation into the realm of general relativistic principles, decoupling from local space-time so that they don't experience inertia, for example, this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So, all of that's coming. All of that's going to be validated, most likely.
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I personally speculate that there is a secret space program going on since Roswell. They've been back engineering, but that's for another time. We're sticking to nuts and bolts here, but the bottom line here also is again what you want to tell people who have been exposed and how to help them. And we are at an hour and 11 minutes, so I'm sure we'll be wrapping up soon here. But and any more to that, Ted?
Well, just that if you're having trouble with this, for example, I had a 73-year-old woman call me, whispering in the telephone because her husband had just gone out to do some shopping, and she wanted to tell somebody about how she had woken up under a disc back in 1970 something, 78, something like that, half naked under a disc, and had spent the next few years tying herself to her children's bed when her husband worked nights. And she'd been ridiculed by her family for that whole time. And here she was calling me, just trying to get somebody to give her some validation, which I gave a ton of it to her, and mm-hmm. was as supportive as I could be in the time I had. But there are a lot of these stories out there. My family wouldn't talk about our exposures because everyone would have thought they were crazy. And that's literally the words they use. And to walk around with that kind of trauma and exposure while these things are following you around, that's heavy. And I know I'm not the only person that gets these direct exposures. And for those people, it can be really, really challenging just to make it through the day, particularly in an environment where everything you think about is questioned. People don't want to give you that validation. They don't want to think about it themselves. Mm-hmm. They don't want you to be right.
As you say, it's a hazard to their thinking.
Yeah. And so it's for those people that are having those problems, get help, get a trauma specialist, get somebody that's accountable for what they say and do, shop around. If you don't like them, get another one, and get some help working through trauma. Otherwise, you'll have to do it the long way, the way I did it. Go out and sit under a tree and fix yourself.
And how long did that take you again?
About 8 years. Ooh. And it's an ongoing process, but yeah. I mean, I still have bad days. There are days when I don't want to go outside. I just feel a sense of foreboding and dread, and I just don't want to go outside.
Well, it just makes me feel like are you sensing something, or you're just going back into that place?
Well, that's the thing. I even myself, I'd rather be wrong. I'd rather not go out there and have one of these things hanging out there in front of me, waiting for the next level. Frankly, these things shouldn't be happening to people like me and a lot of others. They're just kind of cross section of society, mm-hmm. Yet they do, and that's really important, that people who've had these experiences and who are having them understand that there's a sea change going on right now, and there are people out there like me that are willing to talk to them about it. It was very uncomfortable for a long time being me, and carrying this around. I was emails every morning and ruining Thanksgiving dinners and just completely out of control. Mm-hmm. I couldn't function. I had general anxiety, hypervigilance, all of that. And I just imagine when it's other people, that have similar issues or have other problems that it compounds on. They're already paranoid. They're already nervous, and then they got one more thing to be nervous about.
Yeah. Well, one thing that struck me was when you said, while you were going through all that, no one ever asked how you were doing. And that must have been very difficult.
Yeah. Nobody ever.
Go ahead.
Right. They were interested in the story. They wanted to hear about that. They were interested in what I could tell them about tech. And I got a real eyeful of that. But as far as me and how I was doing with it, nobody ever asked. It was just assumed, oh, he's a swordsman, he's a freediver, he's fine, And, to an extent, I'd be guilty of putting across that persona when I wasn't. But that was all part of protecting yourself, because when you've been violated, the last thing you want to do is let people know that you've been violated and that you can't protect yourself. Yeah. I don't know if that's a male thing or not, but it's definitely strong in my head.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm still feeling kind of concerned for the 78-year-old woman that called you. Right. Sounds like it was a horrible story.
Yeah, and she isn't the only one. I had a witness who had taken to tying herself to her husband at night, and they actually got video of her being taken, whatever you want to call it, and
really?
Advised her against even telling ufology about it, because she'd already been violated enough by the incident itself and the inability to protect herself. What's she going to do? Put it out there so Whitley Strieber can make something out of it, or Stephen Greer, or any of those guys,
just people in general attacking.
Yeah.
You have to find that safe place.
And that's what I told her. I said, you and your new family aren't really prepared for the shitstorm you're about to bring down on yourself. And let me advise you, be careful about this. Okay? The world will keep turning without your knowing your story. But get help, Yeah. The time she was living in the UK.
That's. I was going to say, well, that's great advice. That was excellent advice for someone going through something like that, because it's so true. And you know what? I'm sorry, say again.
I said I've watched it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the exploitation of people's experiences with no concern for them as people, and no respect for the data and the implications. You know, it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'd say. Oh, go ahead, Rem.
Yeah. Ted, what is your speculation on the phenomenon? Do you think it's more interdimensional, or do you think it has more nuts and bolts origin, like from another planet?
Well, I don't see anything in the phenomenon yet to make me think of anything other than physics in this universe. Everything that they do, everything that is seen there, could be done by a high culture. And an example of that is Dr. Michio Kaku. He's kind of a famous public scientist, string theorist, and so on. He wrote a paper called "The Physics of Interstellar Travel," more of a monograph, just an article. And he applied the Kardashev scale to interstellar travel. And for your listeners, the Kardashev scale is the ability to assess an extraterrestrial civilization based on the size and coherence of a radio signal over distance. So however much energy they need to do that with will tell you whether they're a class 0, a class 1, 2, or 3 civilization. And Kaku turned around and did the same thing with interstellar travel. And a class 2, class 3 civilization is making unconventional transits using general relativistic principles. They're probably master nanotechnologists, master biomolecular engineers. Their ability to manipulate quanta and manage quantum systems is probably well developed. So your balls of light that turn into solid objects and then go back into balls of light are probably pretty much that. So in my estimation, if it's a they, my own personal experience says it is, but science needs to catch up. But if it's a they originate from somewhere in our universe. All of their physics is in response to the physics of our universe in one way or another. So I'm not ready to go to interdimensional or multiverse explanations for these things yet. We're coming into a new era here, and this work with AIAA is really indicative of what the future is going to do. Mm-hmm. And if you really want to keep a thumb on the pulse, you're going to have to start following what's happening outside of ufology in the field.
And how can people contribute if they want to?
Oh yeah, they can join AIAA. Buy a membership, go to the conferences when we give our talks, this kind of thing. But AIAA is a nonprofit organization, right? So they've got coffers, from their membership fees and that sort of thing that we can fall back on. But mainly, it's the brain trust, it's the mind, that we can. And this is going to take off in a lot of different directions, in a lot of different ways. There are companies that are arising now that are looking into UAP sensing, satellite-based sensing. I'm aware of a couple of programs that are going up that'll be giving us data on satellite data. So there's a lot of things that are happening right now around this subject, and watching what's going on outside of the field is a good idea. We're getting beyond UFO stories, and we're actually going to data, and we're going to have calls for papers. So we're going to see credentialed engagements on various aspects of all of this. So those are the things I would be looking for in the future as you're developing this, is to start looking for some of these technical folks.
Yeah, well, you're going to keep us updated on this. We'll have you back again.
I'm happy to do it.
So thanks. Oh, and Caspian did say thank you very much. It's been fascinating, and hopefully next time you'll be able to see him and hear him.
Yes, well, it was good that he was here.
Yeah.
I would just like to say one thing, Leif. Can Ted just, for our viewers, explain where they can find more information on everything that he's spoken about?
Oh, sure. NARCAP.org is the website, and I can be reached through the website. All of our papers and studies are there as far as NARCAP is concerned. The work of Dr. Hains is there. And then for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, we're still getting our digital footprint up. They're still getting a website together for us, a web page and so on. But we do have a Twitter handle at AIAA_UAP. And you can check that out on Twitter and see our team and some of our basic planning.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ted. Well, It was definitely a fascinating conversation. So thanks so much, and we will see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.